Hi there. My name is Yoel Ben David. I'm the pastor of Immanuel Church. And if you know me, you know that I'm Jewish. And as a Jewish man, I am today remembering the Holocaust, because here in Israel, we have a Holocaust Remembrance Day about a week before Independence Day, and the day that we remember soldiers. And for my family, thankfully, it wasn't, the Holocaust was not the personal tragic. It was obviously a tragedy as Jewish people, but it wasn't a personal tragedy because we were in Morocco, most of my family. My dad's family, however, were in England, and my granddad was an assistant warden, which meant that during the Blitz, when the Germans were attacking the city of London, he went around and cleared rubble, removed stones and bits of buildings after they had been bombed. But it's my wife's family that was most affected by the Holocaust. During the Holocaust, her family, along with all the other families of Latvia, were being gathered up and put into ghettos. But her family had owned a printing house, and the printing house had a worker from Poland who saw this happening and decided he wanted to help. And so he offered my wife's family and their extended family, actually, to get out of the ghetto, that he would smuggle them out. And when this offer was given, most of them refused, except for my wife's grandma, who was a little girl, and her parents. And so they were smuggled out, and they were hidden in the sort of outer house, not the actual house, but the outer house of this Polish family. In fact, they buried them. They sort of dug a big hole, and they lived in this sort of hole for 3 years until the war was over and they were able to live freely again. The reason that we remember it so clearly is because my wife, Adele, is named after the mother of this Polish man who saved them from the Holocaust. And so she bears that name and bears that memory, as we all do. And I think it's important to have these days of remembrance, because it reminds us that all humanity should bear the memory of the Holocaust and all the other terrible events that have happened around the world. But here at our church, at Immanuel Church, the reason that we make sure we remember Holocaust Day is because this church was built by Germans who didn't come here because they were Nazis, but their descendants, by the time we get to the 20s and the 30s, decide that they're going to identify with the German Nationalist Socialist Party back in the country where they came from, to the point that there were swastikas and Nazi salutes happening in our church. And it was the British who eventually removed the people here, removed the Germans from this church and sent them to Australia. In 1977, it was a Norwegian man who came and put in and installed our windows, our stained glass windows. And these beautiful windows tell us the story not only of Jesus, but also of Jonah and the story of Peter, because those things happened here in Jaffa. Finally, though, when installing the window that I'll take you inside in just a moment and show you, that talks of the story of Jesus, you'll see a hand stretching down from heaven and giving its blood, and then blood dropping as a droplet, and inside the droplet of blood you'll see the Star of David. And the Star of David is made out of thorns, and the thorns symbolize not only the suffering of Jesus, but also the suffering of our Jewish people. And it's so important to remember the way that, one, as Christians, even for myself as a Jewish believer in Jesus, I live with the reality that there are those who have believed what I believed and read the same Bible that I read, and yet not understood it, or kept silent when they saw injustice take place around them. And I think that is a story we should never forget, a story we should never remove from our memory. It's something that we need to think about and identify with and understand and confess if that's something we think that we're doing. Secondly, I think we need to remember that these two stories are linked. That the suffering of my Jewish people throughout the generations is not just a suffering for their sin or a suffering, but it's a demonstration of the reality of evil in this world. Jewish people have suffered at the hands of so many, and other peoples as well have suffered, but this suffering should point us to the reality of sin and the need for grace and the need for some other suffering, the suffering of Jesus, the need for one to take suffering from us and upon himself so that we might have grace. So join me now as we go inside the church, and I'm going to show you the window. There it is.
Byen Tel Aviv en moderne storby og en kulturell og sosial smeltedigel med folk fra alle verdenshjørner. Mange leter etter et trygt og godt fellesskap. Få kjenner Jesus. Immanuelkirken et hjem for Jesus-troende jøder og kristne fra alle kontinenter. Det mye som skjer i Immanuelkirken. Her møtes mennesker til inspirerende gudstjenestefellesskap, bibelgruppesamlinger og konserter. Kirken åpen for besøkende alle ukedager. Hundrevis av israelere kommer innom hvert år, og mange nysgjerrige på den kristne tro. Gjennom Immanuelkirken når vi mennesker med evangeliet i storbyen Tel Aviv. Hjelp oss å hjelpe.